Welcome to our deep dive into the fascinating world of microhistory. We've got a really interesting selection of articles and book excerpts all about uncovering the hidden stories in these little corners of history.
Like we're zooming in, right?
Mhm.
On a specific person or event or place or even just a single object, and then all of a sudden, boom,
Yeah.
it just reveals these broader historical trends and insights.
Okay, so I'm fascinated by this idea that something like salt could have such a dramatic history, you
Yeah.
know? Wars, revolutions, shaping civilizations. I mean, how is that even possible?
Well, Mark Kurlansky tackles this head-on in his book, Salt, A World History, and it's a perfect example of how microhistory, it goes way beyond just quirky facts. Like in the past, salt was so incredibly valuable, and not just for flavoring food, but for preserving it, before refrigeration.
So it was really about survival, not just taste.
Exactly. And because it was so scarce, salt became a commodity. It was even a form of currency. Imagine, controlling those salt mines and trade routes could make or break empires.
It's wild. So something we just sprinkle on our food was once a source of immense power and conflict.
Absolutely. And that's what makes microhistory so compelling, It really helps you understand the lives of people in the past and their motivations, like not just the actions of kings and queens.
I'm excited to dive into some of these books you've gathered. I notice a few kind of interesting themes emerging, like this idea of the power of objects, It's crazy to think that the most ordinary things have these hidden stories.
Yeah, it's true. Amy Azarito's book, The Elements of a Home, dives deep into that. Like bathtubs, forks, even napkins. Believe it or not, those actually started as lots of dough in ancient Greece.
Lumps of dough, really?
Yep. And think about forks, They weren't always commonplace. They were actually initially met with a lot of resistance, even seen as like an affront to God.
Why would forks be controversial?
Well, at the time, fingers were considered the proper way to eat. Forks were seen as this kind of like effeminate foreign utensil, a sign of decadence.
So a fork was like a symbol of social change, even religious anxieties.
Exactly. They eventually caught on, as table manners evolved. But it's really interesting to see how that shift happened.
That's a great example of how a mundane object can become a window into a whole different world.
Precisely. And we have quite a few books about that theme. Timekeepers, coal, human history, salt, of course, and paper. Paging through history.
Okay, here's another one that caught my eye. It's something I think we can all relate to: food and drink. There's that saying, you are what you eat, but it seems like you could also say, you are what you drank throughout history.
Huh. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Tom Standage explores this in his book, A History of the World in 6 Glasses. And he tells the story of Western civilization through 6 drinks: beer, wine, spirits, coffee, tea, and Coca-Cola.
Okay, that sounds fun. But how do those drinks connect to the bigger historical events?
Well, each drink kind of represents a specific period,
Got it.
and its associated cultural practices, beliefs, even power structures. For example, he talks about how coffee fueled the Enlightenment.
Oh, so coffee houses were like the social media of their time.
Exactly. These hubs for, writers and philosophers and scientists to discuss new discoveries, they challenged the status quo. They even sparked revolutions.
Wow, so a cup of coffee could fuel the Enlightenment. I can't wait to read that.
And, we've got a lot of other books exploring food and drink. Cod, a biography of the fish that changed the world, curry, eating, reading, and race, spice. The history of a temptation. It seems like every ingredient has a story.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
really does. It's like the kitchen pantry is a time machine.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of microhistory. It makes
Mhm.
history feel tangible and relatable.
Okay, so this next theme's a little less appetizing, but it's equally fascinating: the body and its histories. Considering our own bodies as a lens to understand the past.
Absolutely. When you look at birth, sex, and death practices in different cultures and time periods, it can be really revealing about societal attitudes.
Mary Roach's book, Stiff: The Curious Lives of Human Cadavers, explores how cadavers have been used throughout history, for science.
It's a really thought-provoking look at death and, all of the ethical and cultural dimensions of it. You'll learn about how societies have treated the deceased, from ancient burial rituals to, even using cadavers in anatomical studies.
That's a subject that really challenges our assumptions about the body.
It does. It's a reminder that history is ultimately about the human experience, all of its complexity.
Absolutely. I'm sensing a pattern here. Microhistory is finding the extraordinary in the ordinary.
You got it. And that leads us perfectly into our next theme. But we'll save that for after a quick break.
All right, we're back, ready to uncover some more unexpected stories. I'm really intrigued by this idea that even a single object or event can just illuminate a whole period of history.
It's true. And sometimes it's those seemingly niche stories that end up having the most far-reaching consequences.
Okay, so what's an example? What story really blew your mind?
Well, what about air conditioning? In his book, Cool, Salvatore Basel talks about how this seemingly mundane invention has really quietly shaped our world. It's interesting, it took decades of failed attempts before Willis Carrier actually figured out how to make a reliable air conditioner in 1901.
Okay, so what's the historical takeaway? Did air conditioning change the course of wars or something?
Not directly, but its impact has been huge. I mean, think about it. Air conditioning made it possible for people to live and work comfortably in hot climates. So that led to the growth of cities in the Sun Belt, right? It transformed industries. It even influenced architectural design, like those massive glass skyscrapers we see everywhere. Those wouldn't even be possible without air conditioning.
It's like air conditioning created a whole new landscape, literally and figuratively. I'm starting to see how these microhistories reveal these hidden connections that we might not even notice.
Exactly. It's all about perspective. By shifting your focus to something small, suddenly this bigger story emerges. For example, what about the way that we measure time and how we perceive it?
Timekeeping, I've got to admit, that sounds a little dry. Like I'm just picturing a really technical history of clocks.
Oh, you might be surprised. Simon Garfield's book, Timekeepers, is anything but boring. He takes us on this fascinating journey through the evolution of timekeeping, from ancient sundials to the atomic clocks that we use today.
Okay, so how does a history of clocks connect to bigger historical trends?
Well, it's about more than clocks, It's about our relationship with time itself, how we measure it, how we control it, even how we try to escape it. Like there's this whole chapter about how time was manipulated in the music and film industries, and then there's this crazy story about trying to decimalize time during the French Revolution.
Decimalize time. So instead of a 24-hour day, they wanted a 10-hour day.
Yeah. It obviously didn't catch on, but it just shows you how our understanding of time is constantly changing.
It's a great example of how microhistory can challenge our assumptions about the past. What else do we have that might shake things up a little bit?
Let's talk about brands. In A Secret History of Brands, Matt McNabb really dives into the origins of some of the biggest brands in the world. Coca-Cola, Ford, Kellogg's, Chanel, Adidas. And he uncovers these really surprising, sometimes unsettling truths along the way.
Oh, like what? You've got to give me some examples.
Well, he talks about these cutthroat business tactics that these companies used.
Yeah.
But there are also stories about personal tragedies, drug abuse. There are even some really disturbingly close ties to Nazi Germany in some brands' histories.
Wow, that is unsettling. It really makes you think twice about brand loyalty, doesn't it?
It does. It's just a reminder that history is never simple.
No.
There are always these complexities, and sometimes those uncomfortable truths are the most illuminating.
Okay, we've covered objects, food, technology, even the dark side of consumerism. Is there any corner of life that microhistory hasn't explored yet?
Not really. We have books about the invention of news, the symbolism in church architecture, even the history of swearing, and yeah, really, and even the history of dirt.
Wait, dirt, a history of dirt. I don't know if I get that one.
Oh, it's more interesting than you think. In The Dirt Unclean, Virginia Smith explores how our ideas about cleanliness have changed over time. So, from these elaborate bathing rituals in ancient Rome to the germophobia of the modern era, it's a surprisingly insightful journey through how we think about hygiene.
Okay, I'm officially curious. I never would have thought about dirt as being historically significant.
Exactly. Microhistory is all around us. It's just about looking in the right places, knowing how to connect these little details to a larger narrative.
You've convinced me. Microhistory is anything but boring. It sounds like we still have a lot more to cover.
We do. We have a whole stack of really captivating microhistories here. Shall we dive back in?
Let's do it. Let's see what other treasures we can uncover. We're back, ready for more microhistory.
You really have opened my eyes to how these small stories, these seemingly insignificant things can actually reveal so much about the bigger picture of history.
It's that microhistory magic, like we're using this magnifying glass, right, to examine these intricate details, and then we step back and see how they fit into this larger mosaic.
Okay, so what other magnifying glass moments do we have? What other historical gems are we going to uncover today?
Well, how about transportation, specifically the bicycle? In Bicycle, the history, David V. Hurley takes us on this really fascinating ride through the evolution of this, this seemingly simple invention. You might not think of the bicycle as this revolutionary technology, but it really had a huge impact on society.
Really? I mean, I love riding my bike, but I wouldn't really put it in the same category as, I don't know, the printing press or the internet. You might be surprised. The bicycle wasn't just a mode of transportation, It was a symbol of social change, especially for women. It really gave them a newfound freedom of movement, like challenged traditional gender roles. Just imagine, in the late 19th century, women riding bicycles were seen as like radical, rebellious even.
Wow. I never thought about it that way. Now the bicycle suddenly seems a lot more historically significant.
Exactly. And speaking of significant, how about something that has really shaped our world in countless ways? Oil. Sonia Shah, in her book Crude, The Story of Oil, explores the history of oil, its impact on everything from industrialization to globalization and even climate change.
Oil seems pretty big picture, not really microhistory.
Oh, it's definitely a vast subject. But Shaw brings it down to a human level. She really focuses on the personal stories behind oil, from the roughnecks who drilled for it to the activists who, are fighting against the environmental consequences. It's just a reminder that even these really complex global issues are driven by individual choices and actions.
That's a powerful insight. So it seems like microhistory isn't about ignoring the big picture. It's more about understanding it through the eyes of individuals and communities.
That's it. And for another example of how a simple material can have a global impact, let's talk about cotton. Sven Beckert, in his book Empire of Cotton, a global history shows how cotton was this central player in the rise of modern capitalism and globalization.
Cotton. I've always just thought of it as, kind of a fashion statement, not really this huge historical force.
Oh, cotton was this major driving force behind global trade for centuries. And Becker traces its impact on everything from slavery and colonialism to industrialization and the modern global economy. Like, the clothes we wear are actually connected to these complex and often really troubling historical legacies.
It's incredible. The stuff we wear every day has this really long and layered history. It just makes you want to kind of trace those threads back to where they came from,
It does. It's the perfect example of how microhistory can make history so personal, so relevant to our lives, today.
All this talk about cotton is making me hungry again. We have so many interesting books about food and drink. Remember Cod, a biography of the fish that changed the world. Who knew a fish could be so historically important?
It's the power of microhistory. It finds those extraordinary things in the ordinary. Kurlansky shows how cod fueled exploration, wars, even shaped national diets. It's crazy. It reminds you that something as simple as, the food on your plate has a story to tell.
And we have so many more stories waiting to be, savored. We have Curry, Eating, Rating, and Race by Naven Ruthnam, Spice. The History of a Temptation by Jack Turner, Banana, The Fate of the Fruit That Changed the World by Dan Couple. I mean, every ingredient has its own little secret history.
Every single one. And these books don't just explore culinary history, they explore cultural identity, global trade, even, racial politics. Food can be a lens to understand all these really complex social and cultural dynamics.
Wow, we've covered so much ground today, from salt to bicycles to cotton. I'm starting to see microhistory everywhere now.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
It's a way of looking at the world with these fresh eyes, appreciating all those hidden stories, those things that we take for granted every day.
It's a reminder that history is not just, dates and battles. It's about people, their choices, and how those choices just ripple out through time.
Exactly. And it's a journey of discovery that never ends. There are always more microhistories waiting to be uncovered, more connections, more insights to gain.
Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into the world of microhistory. We hope you've enjoyed exploring all these small stories with us today.
And we really hope you continue exploring on your own. Who knows? You might find some hidden historical gems right in your own backyard.
Now, before we go, you know that book, A Secret History of Brands? We didn't have time to discuss it, but it got me thinking. You know about the power of brands. They shape our perceptions of the world. Think about the brands that you interact with every day. How do they influence your choices, your values, even your sense of identity? It's a question worth thinking about. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into the amazing world of history.